Hello, I'm Kimberly Parnell, and you are listening to Engaging Texas Families, a podcast from the Parent and Family Engagement Statewide Initiative of Texas. Let's jump into today's episode. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Engaging Texas Families. Today we're joined once again by Dr. Steve Constantino and Dr. Peggy Constantino. In this episode, we're going to explore the importance of effective communication and building relationships with the families we serve. There's so much to unpack in this episode, and truly, I think there's something in this episode for everybody. From the first-year teacher to a seasoned administrator, I feel like there's something in here that everyone can put into practice. And I'm confident that every one of our listeners is going to find impactful insight to reflect and potentially put into action. If this is your first time joining us, we're currently working through the Constantino's case study book. And if you've missed some of the previous episodes, we encourage you to go back and listen because they're packed with great discussion and wisdom as well. But for now, let's jump in with the Constantinos. Glad you guys have joined us today.
Glad to be here.
Thanks so much. Well, to start, Steve, could you give us just kind of a brief overview of this principle and explain why you think it's essential for everyone in the school community?
Yeah, I think principle number 2 of the 5 simple principles is, building communication and building relationships. And I think that every school out there makes an effort to communicate. And sometimes I think perhaps maybe we over communicate, but we'll leave that for another podcast. Where I think we need to think about communication is in the realm of relationships. It is very difficult to know that communication has taken place if we don't have some kind of a relationship with the other person or the family or the students or the community. And so principle number 2 really kind of drills down into the importance of communication that builds relationships. The case study that we're doing today really was inspired by the speeches that I've done or the keynotes and work that I've done over the years. I always somewhere in the program say I'm going to give you Steve Constantino's famous 2-question test. Question number 1, what did you do in school today? And the audience yells out, nothing. And question number 2 is, do you have any homework? And of course, the answer is no. And I use those questions as a basis to say, well, what if we could communicate a little bit better? And what if we could consider what it is we're communicating, why we're communicating, and I think most importantly, what we expect from the communication. So the case study that we've chosen to talk about today, Peggy and I had a conversation, and we thought this was a perfect one because it's titled, "What Happened in School Today?" So, Peggy, do you want to say a little bit, or do you want me to?
No, go. Keep on keeping on.
The case study really centers on a young man who comes home from school. He has just entered the 6th grade, and his mom asks him how his day was, and he reaches into his book bag and says, "Oh, I have things for you to sign. I have to sign and bring these things back." And mom says, "Well, what is it that I'm signing?" And the young man says, "I don't know. You just have to sign it and I have to bring it back." And the conversation kind of ensues between mom and the child about what happened in school, and mom is kind of thinking about wanting a different kind of partnership, one that was a bit more two-way. We talk about two-way communication a lot. And she finally contacts her child's teacher, and trying to establish better communication. She feels as though that she's getting information about things that have already occurred in school. She's signing a weekly agenda, or she's signing, making sure she saw work that had happened in school. And she thinks to herself, can I get engaged and involved in things that are happening or things that are going to happen? And she contacts the teacher, and the teacher's very cordial, but gives her basically the same information. She tells mom about, his latest test score and where he falls on the continuum of reading ability. And she mentions that he sometimes is talkative and a bit of a behavior issue, asks for mom's support in better behaviors. And I don't, we've made it a point not to read the case study to anybody, but there's one sentence that I think kind of summarizes the whole thing. Caroline, who is the mom, it goes like this. Caroline did not get the partnership response she was looking for. What she got was the information she had gotten many times before, where Jimmy was academically in comparison to others in his class, and where he was on the continuum of acceptable school behaviors. Caroline thought that there must be more that she could do to engage with Jimmy's teacher, but how? And when we use this case study in workshops, and it's a very common conversation, because many parents feel in the dark about what happened in school today or what's going to happen in school tomorrow. We also, as educators, tend to communicate things that have already occurred. Student information systems that post grades and attendance. Those grades and attendance are examples of things that have happened. It's over. We can't engage with something that's already happened. So we just felt that this case study summarized a lot of what happens, especially as students get older. As they get into middle school and high school, the communication becomes more and more one way with not a lot of opportunity to establish two-way. And if we can't establish the two-way communication, we're going to struggle with that relationship piece. And if we can't get the relationship, well, I don't know how far we're going to get. Exactly. So that's an overview a little bit.
I loved it. We've talked before that the relationship part of this is like the foundation of a house. And until we have it, we can't build and go any further. And so, Peggy, what are your thoughts about effective two-way communication and how it can positively impact student academic success or even social and emotional behaviors?
I think this case study is a good example of a family who's ready to engage, and the response by the school will send it in one of two directions. Even the parent will either continue to be interested and ask questions, or the parent will just turn away and say, oh, the school knows best. So I think what's interesting here is the opportunity for the teacher to have started to ask the parent questions. So I think that's where in this example, could have turned to two-way. Thank you for calling. Here's what I see. What do you see? We don't, in this instance, have a situation where it's two-way. It is one way. So there's not a relationship being built unless the parent decides to continue to engage and ask those questions. So I think the benefit here is a building of a model. If a parent called and has already thought, I wonder how I can be more involved and more engaged. How can I support? Reaching that out and saying, here's how, here are ways, let's work together and build those models.
Absolutely. It's so easy, I think, sometimes to think, we've talked about this before too, that parents don't want to be. It's not that they don't want to be, they just don't know how to be. Even, the most educated or whatever, they just don't know how. They are not trained like an educator. And so instead of viewing them as somebody who doesn't want to be part of the solution, I think it's a mindset shift to they want to be part of the solution, and it's our job to help engage them at a different level.
Well, the folder is an example of what I know Steve speaks about very often is you're sending things home for them to sign. How do you change that way of communication? It doesn't have to just be by phone call or email. It's in other ways. So how do you do that differently? How do you communicate more of what's happening in the future? I realize there are opportunities for things to be signed and we have to do all those things. But it's already something that's going home. So how do you do something differently than what you've been doing to engage them in something happening?
Absolutely. And anybody that's a parent that's listened to this podcast, they can probably tell you how that usually happens. That folder is thrown on the kitchen table or it's thrown to mom in the drop off line. And so there's really not any engagement. It's like, hey, let me check this box and sign it and I'll throw it back to you and I'll figure out what I'm going to do with all these other things that are in here later. And that later for me was a lot of times on the weekend whenever I had a chance to go through it. Well, then I've missed the opportunity for whatever. So I think we all can kind of laugh about the fact that we've been there as that parent, and probably our listeners relate too.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, I think we could dedicate countless hours and multiple episodes just to the topic of communication. And I think you guys would encourage anyone in any role to identify one family they'd like to strengthen communication with and set a goal to build a stronger relationship and collaborate effectively. Any closing thoughts?
I was thinking about a case study that I had written for another book, and it really was based on Peggy's experience as a special education self-contained teacher. It's a story that I'll never forget, and I'll give you the really, really short version. She had a self-contained group of ninth grade students. I think it was ninth or maybe multi-grade, high school students. And there was one student in that class in particular who was, a tough kid. And what Peggy did so very well was to keep in touch with the young man's mother, not to share with her what was going wrong, but what was going right. She found something every couple of days. I know that she was in constant communication. And even mom at one point said, I've never really gotten any phone calls with good news. And so I thought of that as we were preparing for this podcast, because, of course, that ended up being a success story. That young man went from difficult and not doing well academically. And at that time, in that particular school system, it was a required essay, wasn't it, Peggy? They all had to write an essay to.
11th grade research paper was a graduation requirement in the county.
And this young man wrote it and passed the research paper. And so the success that she had with this young man, in addition to, of course, her skills as a teacher, but connecting with mom and saying, letting mom know when there's a good day, letting mom know when things are going well. So many parents tell me when I travel, I only hear bad news. I only hear, and we've heard that for years and years and years. So when you going back to what you said about focusing on one family, I always love the question. This is a question that I learned from the Parent Teacher Home Visit Project out in Sacramento, where they always suggest that the first question that you should ask a family is, what are the hopes and dreams for your child? And it just opens the door to a new pathway of conversation. And the first message parents get is, wow, this is not about academics. It's not about behavior. It's not about the grading policy or the discipline policy or all the things that went wrong. It's the school really wanting to know what my dreams are for my child. And I think that if we can start to position communication that way, we can get to engagement. And the last thing I'll say is we shouldn't confuse the words communication and engagement. Because we have sent information or given information doesn't necessarily mean we've engaged.
So good. Peggy, do you know about that student now?
Yes. Well, it's been a long time, but I did know the results of his grad. It was over 20 years ago. That parent, it was her youngest son and the only one that had not had challenges and dropped out of school out of 4 of her boys. And it was my first year teaching high school, but it was a comment made to me, through my teacher prep was, make those first calls. And I'm not going to lie, it was very difficult to find something good because he was quite a handful. But it worked. It worked with every single one of the students that I had in that class who were all challenged behaviorally in that class.
Wow. The power of one positive comment can change the trajectory of a kid and their family.
Yeah, but it was scary. I mean, it's a scary phone call to make because you don't know. But yeah, thank you, Stu, for sharing that. It's very true. And I use that as an example when people ask me. And as a school leader, I used to model that for my teachers who had difficult interactions because it can happen. And then you're frightened and you're fearful of trying it again. But I think it is an important opportunity to build. And in this case study, if that teacher maybe had done that, rather than launching in right out of the gate with behavior stories, it could change the relationship out of the gate.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for your time today. We're already excited about our next episode where we're going to dive into Principle 3 from the book and explore the topic of building family efficacy. Thank you guys for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Engaging Texas Families.
Thank you.
Thanks all.